Hey, Fuft, did you just get your ass kicked to your own game by Kookaturter? Sturk asked, stupidly. No, he just decided that he wanted to hold your hand and you managed to find enough sapience in that empty skull of yours to beat me all on your own. Of course Kookaturter beat me, thought Fuft. He couldn't believe the words had come out of his mind's metaphysical mouth, but Kookaturter had indeed managed to beat him in warrants. Not only beat him, but completely destroy him. Fuft, not for the first time, considered quickly and quietly silencing Zurk before he could tell anyone else. Too late. Sturk's idiocy, easily outpacing all rational thought, prompted him to open his mouth and shout, "Everyone, Fuft just lost, and he did it to Kookaturter." If there was one thing that could be said about Sturk, it was that he was honest. He really didn't have the sense to be anything else. So when he said something, even something as ridiculous as his last utterance, everyone came to see what he had misunderstood to believe something as ridiculous as Fuft losing to Kookaturter. The board emitter, seemingly to revel in Fuft's defeat, cheerfully started another game, beeping the signal to begin the torment. Fuft could have sworn that beep sounded like the maniacal laughter of a slave reveling in the downfall of his master. He mentally kicked the emitter, which didn't seem to care in the slightest about his imagined abuses. The crew members relaxing in the newly acquired ship's common lounge gathered around the odd trio, encircling the board emitter. Fuft considered not starting the game. After all, the first move was his and he could plead exhaustion. Glancing at the numerous spectators, though, he realized he couldn't turn back now, or else everyone would think he had somehow lost to Sturk. After all, how could Kookaturter have beaten him? Always trying to answer that question himself, he moved his first piece. The game spiraled into the abyss from there. Kookaturter demonstrated even more skill with the predatory pieces than he had with those of the prey. Nearly every turn, Fuft lost the maximum number of pieces he was able to lose a turn, resulting in one of the most expedient and humiliating games in Fuft's memory. As Kookaturter threw a Sturk, who was all too happy to give up the need to think, mercilessly exterminated Fuft's last few pieces, Fuft looked into Kookaturter's eyes and saw for the first time the intelligence lurking beneath, passing together the most efficient and ruthless way to annihilate any remaining chance of Fuft's victory. Others in the crew were noticing it as well. As the oldest, albeit grouchiest person on board, Fuft wondered how he'd never seen it before. Even worse, however, he wondered what this creature would do, not only to this ship and everyone aboard, but to the galaxy, once his species reached the stars. Fuft immediately stifled the overly preachy and humorless thought. Damn, he was getting wishy-washy in his old age. I'll have to watch out for that. You okay, Sturk? Asked Rock, interrupting Fuft's cautionary thought. He looked at Sturk, who had been growing progressively quiet as the game had progressed. He had just assumed that Sturk had finally started realizing what Kookaturter's actions implied, but as he looked at him, he could see there was something wrong. Sturk's eyes had begun to water, although he could have been crying over his ill-fated genetics. His nose was beginning to run, as though clearing the remnants his brain had left behind upon his departure, and he continued to clear his throat with a vigour that suggested he had stuck an entire dizzy rat down there. Then it got worse. Dear Journal, I am a walking petri dish. From Earth. After I finished the first game, Whip looked stunned and sour at the same time, but he'd looked sour since I first laid eyes on him, so I think he was just stunned. I smiled at him. It was not a smirk, I'm not that kind of guy, saying, "Care for another game?" I don't think he did, but Dippy click-shouted something excitedly, which brought everyone in the lounge over to our table, trapping Whip into another match as the clan ruthlessly started another game. I dominated the ball from the first turn, and the game was over in a mere 5 minutes. I smiled as I heard shocked and incredulous clicks from the onlookers. At least that's what I hoped those clicks were. My thoughts left the game and surrounding blue giraffes, when a sound like that of a cat with an entire mouse and its extended family lodged in its throat made me glance back at my unwilling assailant. Dippy looked awful. He hadn't said much, and I had assumed this to mean he had accepted his fate, but now he was hacking, sniffling, wiping his eyes and trying to click at the same time. He had started to shake, making him look even more like a heroin addict. I let go of his hand as he got up, watching as he tottered towards the exit in the direction of the living quarters when his entire body convulsed. At first I thought he was pitching backwards, head first, perhaps attempting a backflip. He suddenly whipped his head forward, which had nearly been on his back, and expelled what was unmistakably a colossal blue giraffe sneeze, barely managing to avoid slamming his head into the ground in front of him. This was followed by a second sneeze, and a third, each time throwing his head from one extreme to the other. At first I hoped that he was merely expressing his previously repressed passion for heavy metal, but as sneeze after sneeze racked his body, I thought his obsession had perhaps gone too far. I didn't think he'd survive a metal concert anyway. The others watching apparently seemed to be of the same opinion. Several rushed over to Dippy, who I quickly renamed Drippy on account of his nose's desire to join a marathon. Helping him stand as he'd just fallen to his knees in rapture for his love of music, several yet unnamed blue giraffes led him towards the direction of the sickbay. Odd that. So about this game you guys have here, do we need to play another one, or have I made my point? The doors to the medical bay opened, admitting Rook, Nuxt, and Kupt, supporting a weak-kneed and wheezing Sturk between them. He made a terrible spitting sound, and his head exploded into motion, first flung back in a massive inhalation, then whipping forward in an arc and slamming into the ground in front of him, where he left an imprint of his face in snot and tears. What happened to him? Asked Zerk, helping the other three carry the shaking Stuk to the primary medical bay, which had a built-in biomedical scanner. Zerk had been so excited that she would finally be able to see every cell and pathogen in any organism able to fit on the bed, and now she had a chance to use it, although she would have wished she did not have to try it out on one of her own crewmates. We had no idea, Kukututu. Zerk inwardly groaned when they said that name in relation to the current emergency, but didn't interrupt. Was destroying Foofed in a game of warrants? Now she did interrupt. Excuse me, I misheard. No, you didn't. Kukututu played Foofed a few minutes ago. Not only did he somehow know the rules of the game, but he played to a degree I'd never thought possible. The game was over in about 5 minutes. Foofed never had a chance. I don't even want to think about what this means. Zerk did. It meant they'd been horribly, irreparably wrong. It meant Kukututu wasn't an animal, but a thinking, sapient, though perhaps primitive, being they'd merely been treating as a pet. Tricks, behaviours, quirks, those could be taught by a persevering previous master. A game like Warren's, especially Warren's, was a game of abstract thought and advanced forethinking, something no animal possessed. Crap. Sturk seemed to be having a seizure, so Zuruk moved the matter to her "do immediately once someone isn't dying" list, which had become alarmingly few in the last few hours. The biomedical scanner came online, and within seconds had analysed every cell in his body. It also immediately noticed the unknown organism rampaging through Sturk's body. It alerted Zerk to his discovery. Zerk almost wished it hadn't. It was a virus, but unlike any virus she'd ever seen before. Most of the viruses throughout the universe, though easily contracted, were fought off in a matter of weeks if not days. Most viruses weren't like this virus though. It seemed to have 2 layers of protection for its destructive RNA, a capsid, though composed of proteins Zerk had only seen in some of the strongest biomaterials, and a second layer, or what appeared to be a phospholipid bilayer, as if it were a cell. It also seemed to have 3 times as many glycoproteins on its surface, as though it thought it would be destroyed in seconds if it couldn't find a cell to bond to. I'm an engineer, Zerk, not a microbiologist. I didn't understand a word you just said. Zerk hadn't realised she had been speaking out loud. Fine. Say your standard virus is a Gricker, she said, referencing an almost galactically known predator, which had been taken from a death world millennia ago when the galaxy was still largely unexplored. No one remembered which death world it had been, and the Gricker had changed dramatically, as it had been introduced to other planets either on purpose or by accident. It was a majestic beast with a sleek body, pointed ears, and a dexterous tail with which it could display nearly sapient levels of emotion. It was even kept as a house pet by those who liked exotic and dangerous beasts. If you managed to domesticate it, it was one of the most rewarding pets due to its soothing, rumbling purr it would produce if you mastered the art of petting it, a skill in and of itself. Although all who owned them said the first lesson was to never touch the belly unless it was presented to you, and even then with extreme caution. Indeed, the Gricker hated having its belly exposed to the point that if you dropped it with its back towards the ground, It would twist itself so as to land on his feet. Some people went so far as to say Gricker always landed on their feet. Superstition only. This virus would be a Gricker in military-grade body armor with an autonomous heavy pulse turret mounted on its back. The room fell silent with this ominous description. "Will he live?" asked Rook, after several long seconds. "I don't have the needed facilities here. We'll need to get him to the nearest settled planet. I might be able to slow its progress down. It would help if I knew how he contracted it." She looked at the three, not attempting to eviscerate themselves through their mouths. "I think he got it from Kookaturra," Nook said. "He was holding onto Sturk's hand during the game with Fuft, since he couldn't directly interface with the game board. Right after the game, Sturk was acting all fidgety, and then started throwing his head around like a madman." Zurg could have guessed as much. Not that Kookaturra had been holding Sturk's hand, but that it had come from Kookaturra. Anything unbelievable seemed to originate with him. "Bring him in here. If he's immune to this plague, then we may be able to see how to fight it or even cure it. You should be safe from the virus so long as you don't touch him." She suddenly remembered, with a sinking feeling, the way in which those who had been protected by Kookaturra in the engine room had thanked him. "Get Kookaturra in here now. I think he may have infected quite a few more people than Sturk." Her worst fears were realised when Pickard stumbled into the medical bay, dry-retching as he attempted to spew the contents of his stomach, which appeared to have already been emptied down his front. "What's the matter?" Zurg asked with growing horror. Pickard opened his mouth, and such a disgusting smell reached her nose that she too vomited all over Pickard's front. She had Sturk's caretakers move into a nearby bed as Pickard took his place in the biomedical scanner. It soon revealed that an unknown form of frightfully durable bacteria had invaded his tongue and beneath his gum line, giving his breath a monstrous odour. She had never before seen a bacteria that did this. Of course, she knew hundreds of pathogens which lived in the mouth, but she had never come across one which made his victim never want to open their mouth again. She was relieved when Kookaturra was escorted into the medical bay and placed herself on the biomedical scanner after Pickard had been laid next to Sturk. Not wanting to be distracted with his incredible physiology, she set the scanner to search exclusively for dangerous microorganisms on par with those infecting Sturk and Pickard. The computer would beep when it had found one, if Kookaturra was carrying any more. She initiated the scan, and the computer immediately beeped. It kept beeping. It turned out I hadn't made my point. After Whip left, it seemed every blue giraffe and his second cousin thrice removed wanted to play a game with me. I happily obliged. Then I just kind of obliged. Then I started unhappily obliging. It was rather annoying playing games with beings that seemed to have the strategic capacity of a hamster. After about the 10th game in so many minutes, the three who had helped Drippy out of the room re-entered and clicked at me, motioning for me to follow them. Not needing any more of an excuse, I brutally entered the game I was playing, hopped off my seat, waved goodbye to my most recent unwilling assistant, and followed Drippy's entourage out of the lounge. They brought me to the ship's sickbay and motioned me to get on the largest bed in the room. I looked at the other beds and saw Drippy. His sneezes had become even more alarming and exaggerated. Even as I watched, his chest heaved, and his entire upper body skyrocketed off the bed. His head hit the ceiling with a dull thud, and he collapsed on the bed, knocked unconscious. Stifling my laughter, I looked to another figure near Drippy, and recognised Jiggles. He seemed to be crying, 2 variations of sick on the front of his robe. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, more for my own benefit than anyone else's. Jiggles seemed to want to talk with me, though. He opened his mouth, and I added a puddle of my own to the foot of his bed. His breath reeked. I had had some nasty cases of morning breath before, but halitosis had this giraffe by the balls. More as an excuse to back away from Jiggles, I quickly hopped onto the indicated bed. Mama Giraffe, who was standing nearby, began punching buttons on the console I couldn't see. The whir of a mechanism in motion emanated from the bed. At the same time, a faint but rapid beeping began to sound from Mama's console. I could tell by the light of the console playing over Mama's face that it was gathering some form of information from me. Her face began to pale. "That bad, eh?" I chuckled nervously. She looked up from her console, and my eyes locked with hers. "Oh, shit."